The galaxy was a vast, unforgiving expanse where peace was often a fleeting ideal. The intergalactic stage was divided between factions of species, each with their own history, culture, and ambitions. Among them, humanity had earned a reputation not just as an emerging power, but as one whose diplomats were exceptionally skilled in negotiation. Their success was due in large part to their ability to see beyond the boundaries of war, offering solutions when others only saw conflict. But there was something peculiar about human diplomacy, something that set them apart from the other species in the galaxy. The truth was simple, but it was rarely spoken aloud. Human diplomatic ships were always heavily armed. While other species might send their envoys in ships stripped of weapons, relying on peaceful gestures to carry them through tense situations, humans were different. Their diplomatic vessels were equipped with advanced defense systems, heavy armament, and even offensive capabilities. The sight of a human diplomatic ship approaching any neutral space was often enough to make others pause, wondering why the humans couldn't leave their weaponry behind. Now, that peculiar trait would be put to the test. An urgent summit had been called, a meeting between human diplomats and the Varthari, an expansionist empire with a well-earned reputation for violence and conquest. Their rise to power had been swift, their approach ruthless. For years, they had spread fear throughout the galaxy, absorbing weaker species and annihilating anyone who resisted. Peaceful discussions with them were almost unheard of, with any attempt at diplomacy ending in betrayal or bloodshed. Humanity had been caught in the Varthari's crosshairs. For decades, the Varthari had eyed human space, hungry for expansion, and had made several attempts at testing human defenses. Yet, humans had managed to avoid conflict. Until now. This summit, set to take place in neutral space near the galactic border, would be humanity's most challenging negotiation yet. A fragile peace was at stake, one that could prevent the Varthari from launching a full-scale invasion of human-controlled territories. As the human fleet made its way toward the Varthari-controlled space, the crew aboard the flagship, Resolute Peace, was tense. The captain, Admiral Corrin, stood on the observation deck, looking out into the abyss of stars. He knew the stakes. The Varthari were not like other species. They respected only one thing: power. And humanity, despite their idealistic reputation, had learned that lesson the hard way. "Captain," said Commander Ryla, approaching with a stack of tactical reports, "the Varthari are expecting us. They know we're bringing firepower, but there's still uncertainty about how we'll approach the talks." Corrin turned to face her, his expression hard. "We have no choice but to show them we can protect ourselves. If they see weakness, there won't be a negotiation. There will only be war." The Varthari had already sent their ships to meet the human delegation, a line of sleek warships that appeared deceptively peaceful from afar, but carried enough firepower to obliterate entire fleets. The human ships, in contrast, gleamed with advanced armaments and shields, an unmistakable statement of their readiness for whatever lay ahead. As the Resolute Peace entered the Varthari's orbit, the crew braced for what was to come. The ambassador for the mission, Valeria Dorn, stood by the captain's side, her gaze never leaving the viewport. The crew had trained for this moment for months, but there was a lingering fear among them. The Varthari didn't negotiate. They conquered. And every diplomat who had faced them before had been forced to learn that lesson the hard way. Admiral Corrin stepped forward, addressing his crew with a steely resolve. "This is not just a mission for peace. This is a message. Humanity is ready for whatever comes next." The first human diplomatic mission to the galaxy was nothing short of a disaster. It took place almost a century ago, during humanity's early days of intergalactic exploration. At that time, humans had not yet established the firm reputation they had today. They were an unknown quantity in a vast and unpredictable universe. But they were also hopeful, believing that diplomacy and negotiation could solve even the most challenging conflicts. The target of humanity's first true diplomatic endeavor was the Crickster, a species from a distant star system. The Crickster were known throughout the galaxy as a fiercely proud and warlike species. They valued strength above all else, with a culture built around physical combat and conquest. To the Crickster, peace was something to be taken by force, not discussed at a table. Humanity had underestimated the Crickster. Their first envoy, the Unity's Hope, entered the Crickster system unarmed, relying solely on the hope that the promise of peace would be enough to persuade them. The ship was sleek, unassuming, carrying a small crew of diplomats who believed in the power of words. They had studied the Crickster culture, prepared to engage in conversation and reach a mutual understanding. But the moment they arrived, it was clear that the Crickster had no intention of negotiation. The humans had barely finished their introductory speech before the Crickster launched a surprise attack. A barrage of plasma fire rained down upon the Unity's Hope, ripping apart its unarmored hull with terrifying efficiency. The humans had no defense, no shields, no weapons, nothing to protect them from the onslaught. In the midst of the chaos, the crew of the Unity's Hope made an emergency jump to the nearest human-controlled space, narrowly escaping with their lives. The Crickster, satisfied with their demonstration of power, allowed the ship to flee, but the message had been clear. Diplomacy was a game of strength, not words. Admiral Corrin, who had served as a junior officer on that mission, still remembered the horror of that day. The Crickster had taught humanity an invaluable lesson. Peace was not just about making offers. It was about showing the strength to back up those offers. If humanity wanted to survive in this galaxy, it would have to understand that power was not something to shy away from. The aftermath of the attack led to a seismic shift in human diplomatic policy. From that point forward, every human diplomatic vessel would be equipped with advanced weaponry, shields, and tactical systems. But it wasn't just about preparation for attack. It was about ensuring that the first sign of aggression would be met with an overwhelming response. Back on the Resolute Peace, Valeria Dorn, the head diplomat for the current mission, knew the legacy of that first encounter with the Crickster all too well. She stood in front of the viewport, staring out at the Varktheri fleet that loomed ahead. The Varktheri, like the Crickster before them, respected only strength. She had no illusions about the ease of this mission. She was prepared for the worst. After all, humanity had learned from its mistakes. Commander Ryla approached her, her expression solemn. "You know, Ambassador, we'll need to remind them who we are. The Varktheri might want to test us, just like the Crickster did." Valeria nodded slowly. "I know. And if they do, we'll be ready." She didn't want to think about what might happen if the Varktheri launched an attack. But the Resolute Peace was armed to the teeth. Human diplomacy, once reliant solely on negotiation, had evolved into something far more complex. Now, it was a delicate balance between peace and force, between words and weapons. The galaxy would respect humanity, whether through diplomacy or through undeniable strength. The Resolute Peace continued its course through the stars, steadily approaching the neutral zone where the summit with the Varktheri was scheduled to take place. On the bridge, the atmosphere was tense, the quiet hum of the ship's systems, the only sound that filled the room. But beneath the surface, every officer and crew member knew that the stakes were much higher than they appeared. As Valeria Dorn, the lead diplomat, walked the halls of the ship, she couldn't shake the weight of what was to come. She had been in numerous diplomatic missions before, but this felt different. The Varktheri were not like the species she had faced in the past. The galaxy had learned to fear them. They were known for their swift, brutal conquests and their lack of regard for peace. The human delegation had to be prepared for any eventuality, and they had learned the hard way that being caught unprepared could cost them everything. Her thoughts were interrupted as she reached the observation deck, where Admiral Corrin stood, staring out into the cold void of space. The stars outside were distant, peaceful, but the tension inside the ship was anything but. Corrin turned as she approached, his face showing the marks of years spent in the military, the lines of experience and caution etched into his features. "Ambassador," Corrin greeted her, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge of concern. "We're about to meet with the Varktheri. You know how important this is." Valyria nodded. "I do. But I also know that we're not just going into this meeting with words. We're going in with weapons." Corin's gaze sharpened. "You've heard the stories, haven't you?" "I've heard many," she said softly. "About the Crickster, the Varktheri, and other species who've tested humanity's resolve. But what's the real reason behind all the firepower? Why do we need it? It's not just to defend ourselves, is it?" For a moment, Corin was silent, his eyes fixed on the stars. Then he sighed, a deep, weary sound. He looked at Valyria, his expression heavy with the knowledge of history. "It's not just defense," he said quietly. "It's a message, one that's been ingrained in us since the first diplomatic mission to the Crickster. You see, after that disaster, we learned something that would define how we interacted with the rest of the galaxy. We learned that diplomacy alone, kind words and peaceful gestures, would never be enough." Valyria listened closely, her mind racing. "What did we learn?" Corin's voice grew softer. "We learned that some species respect only one thing: strength. The Crickster didn't care about our intentions. They saw only weakness. The moment we arrived without the ability to defend ourselves, they saw an opportunity to strike. We were naive, and we almost paid the price for it." He turned to face her fully now. "The weapons aren't just there to scare people, Ambassador. They're there to ensure that when we speak, people listen. When we make a promise, it's backed up by our strength. The rest of the galaxy respects us because they know we won't be easy prey. We don't take peace for granted. We protect it, fiercely." Valyria absorbed the weight of his words. It wasn't just about fighting wars or showing off power. It was about survival. The firepower wasn't a tool for domination, but for survival, a way to ensure that humanity's voice could be heard over the noise of galactic conflicts. "Do you think the Varktheri will understand that?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of doubt. Corin gave her a slight grim smile. "They'll understand one way or another. The question is, how much blood will it take before they see it?" As the ship continued to close the distance between them and the Varktheri fleet, Valyria's thoughts grew darker. The weapons, the defenses, the entire fleet, it was all part of the delicate balance humanity had built between diplomacy and force. They weren't just negotiators. They were survivors. And as much as she wished for peace, she knew deep down that humanity's greatest strength lay not just in its ability to speak, but in its readiness to defend the peace it had worked so hard to achieve. The Varktheri Empire had been a growing presence on the galactic stage for decades. Unlike other species that expanded slowly through diplomacy or trade, the Varktheri conquered with the speed and precision of a predator stalking its prey. Their ships were built for war, their society built for dominance. In the eyes of the Varktheri, strength was the ultimate virtue, and weakness was an invitation for destruction. Admiral Corin had fought the Varktheri in the past, and the scars of those battles still lingered in his mind. It wasn't the first time the Varktheri had set their sights on humanity. They had attempted to invade human space more than once, but each time, humanity had managed to hold them back. The battles were fierce, the losses significant, but human determination was a force to be reckoned with. However, the threat was far from over. The Varktheri had a new leader, a ruthless warlord named Karish, who had united the fractured Varktheri factions under his banner. Under his command, the Varktheri military had become even more aggressive, more strategic. His ultimate goal was simple: total domination of the galaxy. And humanity, with its thriving colonies and strategic position, was firmly in his sights. As the resolute peace approached the Varktheri-controlled sector of space, Valyria Dorn stood on the bridge, her thoughts focused. She had read the reports, seen the intelligence. Karish was a warlord of the highest caliber, brilliant, ruthless, and utterly unyielding. The Varktheri had no interest in peace unless it was forced upon them. And with the Varktheri now massing fleets on the edges of human space, The time for talks was growing short. "Admiral, we're entering Vark-Theri-controlled space." Commander Ryla's voice cut through the silence, bringing Valeria back to the present. Corin stepped forward, his gaze narrowing as he looked out into the distance at the Vark-Theri ships looming ahead. The Vark-Theri fleet was massive. Imposing warships built for power, sleek and deadly. It was clear that the Vark-Theri were not here for negotiations. They were here to show their dominance. "Their fleet's larger than expected," Corin said grimly. "Karish wants us to know he's in control. He's going to test us, Valeria. The weapons on this ship aren't just a precaution anymore. They're a necessity." Valeria nodded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "And if we don't play his game, he'll attack us." "Without a doubt," Corin replied, his voice cold and resolute. "Karish respects only one thing: power. If we show any sign of weakness, he will crush us. The Vark-Theri don't negotiate. They conquer." Valeria couldn't shake the grim thought that lingered in her mind. The Vark-Theri had never before considered peace. They saw it as a sign of weakness, a tool to exploit. The only way to survive, to force them to the table, was to make it clear that humanity would not be intimidated. "We'll show them we're ready," Valeria said, her voice steady. "We have the strength, and we won't back down." The resolute Peace moved forward, its advanced weapon systems powered up and ready. The ship was a symbol of humanity's resolve, a symbol of strength. The diplomats aboard might be trained to speak, but every officer and crew member knew that the true power of humanity lay in their ability to defend themselves and their ideals. As the human fleet closed in on the Vark-Theri's central command station, the tension on the bridge was palpable. The crew braced for the worst, knowing that whatever happened next, they would be fighting not just for survival, but for the future of humanity itself. But what Valeria feared most was that no amount of weaponry would be enough to stop a species that viewed all life through the lens of power. The galaxy had learned to fear the Vark-Theri. Humanity was about to learn if they were truly ready to face them. The Vark-Theri fleet loomed like an ominous shadow as the resolute Peace closed in on the designated meeting location, a neutral station located on the edge of contested space. The tension was palpable on the bridge. Every crew member knew that the summit with the Vark-Theri wasn't just about diplomacy. It was about survival. Valeria Dorn stood beside Admiral Corin, her mind racing with strategies. But one fact stood clear. This negotiation would be like none she had ever faced. "All communications channels are open, Captain," Commander Ryla announced, breaking the silence. "The Vark-Theri have sent their terms for the summit. They're demanding immediate concessions before we even begin talking." Valeria's brow furrowed as she read the transmission. The Vark-Theri's terms were typical of their aggressive nature: territory, resources, and a promise to abandon any further military buildup in exchange for human subjugation. It was an impossible demand, but the Vark-Theri always tested the boundaries, seeking to see how far they could push. "We won't give them an inch," Corin said firmly, turning to Valeria. "We have to stand our ground. If we show any sign of weakness, the Vark-Theri will view it as an invitation to attack." Valeria nodded in agreement, though her mind weighed the costs. Every human diplomat knew that negotiations with the Vark-Theri had one simple rule: they respected only strength. They didn't seek peace, they sought power, and they would only back down if they realized that humanity was more than capable of defending itself. The time for talk had come, but in this galaxy, even words carried the threat of violence. The human fleet was a symbol of their power, but it was also a reminder that peace wasn't something they could take for granted. Humanity had fought too hard to get where they were, and no one was willing to let the Vark-Theri tear it all apart. "We'll counter their offer with one of our own," Valeria said, standing tall as she issued her command. "We'll offer peace on our terms, but we won't give up any of our territory. We'll promise mutual cooperation, but we won't be bullied into submission. Send the response. We'll show them that we're not afraid to stand firm." "Understood," Ryla responded, her fingers flying across the controls as she sent the counteroffer to the Varktheri leadership. The tension on the bridge escalated as the minutes ticked by, each second bringing them closer to the negotiation room and a confrontation that could determine the fate of humanity. Every officer aboard the Resolute Peace knew that this wasn't just a diplomatic mission. It was a high-stakes game of survival. If they succeeded, humanity could secure peace with one of the galaxy's most dangerous factions. If they failed, it could mean the beginning of another devastating war. As the communication channels buzzed to life, the image of a Varktheri delegate flickered onto the main screen. Koresh, the Varktheri warlord, stood at the center of a large, imposing hall. His towering figure, armored in dark plating, radiated power and authority. His piercing eyes locked onto the camera as he spoke, his voice like the growl of a predator. "So, the humans finally arrive," Koresh said, his tone filled with both disdain and amusement. "You think you can negotiate with us? We will not be swayed by weak words or empty promises. Submit to our terms, or face the consequences." Valeria stood firm, her voice unwavering as she addressed him. "We won't bow to threats, Koresh. We offer you peace on equal footing, but we will not give up our sovereignty. If you choose war, know that you will face the full might of humanity. We will not be intimidated." Koresh's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "You are bold, human. Perhaps too bold. We shall see if your strength matches your words." The screen went dark, the transmission ending abruptly. The silence in the room was deafening. The entire crew of the Resolute Peace stood in anticipation, knowing that the Varktheri leader's words were a prelude to the violence that was likely to come. Koresh had shown his true intentions. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to test their resolve. Valeria turned to Admiral Korin, her expression steely. "He'll make his move soon. We have to be ready." Korin nodded grimly. "We'll show him exactly what humanity is capable of." The silence that followed Koresh's transmission hung heavily in the air. The crew aboard the Resolute Peace stood at the ready, waiting for the inevitable. The Varktheri warlord's words were a thinly veiled threat, and the tense atmosphere could only mean one thing: diplomacy had failed. The next move would belong to the Varktheri. Admiral Korin paced the command center, his mind racing through every possible scenario. He had fought against the Varktheri before, but this was different. This wasn't just another skirmish. This was a galaxy-shaking conflict that could reshape the balance of power. Humanity had made its stand, but Koresh was not known for his mercy. "Status report," Korin barked, snapping the crew back into focus. "All systems remain operational, sir," Commander Ryla replied, her fingers moving quickly over her console. "The fleet is ready, shields are up, and weapons are at full readiness. But I'm detecting a large Varktheri fleet moving toward our position." Valeria Dorn, standing just behind Korin, clenched her fists. The reality of their situation was settling in. Koresh had no intention of negotiating further. The human response had been clear, but now the test was at hand. Would the Varktheri strike immediately, or would they take a moment to gather their strength? Before she could voice her thoughts, a communication came through, the harsh voice of Koresh filling the bridge once again. His expression was cold, his eyes flashing with contempt. "You have made your decision, human," Koresh's voice growled. "You have rejected our terms, and for that, you will pay the price. Your fleet is already surrounded. Prepare for your extinction." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving a tense quiet behind. The crew on the bridge exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear now. Koresh had underestimated humanity's resolve, but he was not one to retreat. The Varktheri were coming, and they were coming in full force. Admiral Korin stepped forward, addressing his crew with a gravitas that only a seasoned leader could command. "We knew this was a possibility. Our mission was always to show them our strength. Now, we will prove it. Get ready for combat. All stations, prepare for immediate engagement." Valeria's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her composure. We can't let them break us, Admiral. If we show weakness, it will only encourage further aggression. The galaxy is watching, and if we fall here, it won't just be us. It will embolden every warlord and conqueror in the galaxy. Corin gave her a sharp nod, his face grim. We fight for more than our survival, Ambassador. We fight for the future of every peaceful species in this galaxy. As the Varktheri fleet neared, the human ships moved into position. The Resolute Peace was at the heart of the formation, its weapons primed and shields at full strength. The battle wasn't just about firepower. It was about sending a message. Humanity would not be pushed aside, not without a fight. On the bridge, the crew was in motion, executing their orders with precision. The human fleet was vastly outnumbered, but they had something the Varktheri lacked: coordination, strategy, and the unity that came from knowing they were defending not just their lives, but the very principles they held dear. The first strike came without warning. A barrage of plasma fire shot through space, hitting the human fleet with devastating force. The Resolute Peace rocked with the impact, but its shields held. The crew braced, ready for the next wave. The Varktheri had begun their assault, and there would be no turning back. "Return fire," Corin ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Target their lead ships. Make them feel the full force of our defenses." The human ships responded with a fury that was unmatched. Their advanced weaponry unleashed hell upon the Varktheri, sending shockwaves through their ranks. The first few Varktheri ships began to break apart under the onslaught, their shields unable to withstand the concentrated firepower. But there was no time to celebrate the first victories. More Varktheri ships poured into the battle, overwhelming the human fleet with sheer numbers. The Resolute Peace fired again, hitting multiple targets, but the Varktheri were relentless. Valeria's breath quickened as she watched the battle unfold before her. There was no turning back now. This fight would determine everything: the survival of humanity, the fate of their peaceful future, and the hope that diplomacy could still triumph over force. The battle raged on, filling the void of space with the deadly light of explosions and the roar of weapons fire. The human fleet, outnumbered but determined, stood firm against the Varktheri onslaught. Every ship in the formation was a testament to human ingenuity and resolve. Each human pilot, each officer, every soldier aboard fought not just for survival, but for the future of their species and the very idea of peace. Valeria Dorn stood at the observation window, watching the battle unfold. She could feel the pulse of the Resolute Peace beneath her feet as it rocked from the shockwaves of impacts. The ship's weapons fired in perfect synchronization, disintegrating enemy ships one after another, but the Varktheri were relentless. For every one that fell, two more seemed to take its place. The tide of battle wasn't turning in their favor, yet humanity would not break. Not today. "Admiral Corin," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. "We're holding our own, but we're going to need more than just firepower to push them back. The Varktheri won't stop until they're sure we're defeated." Corin stood beside her, his gaze never leaving the view screen. He had seen battles like this before, overwhelming odds, death, and destruction all around. But he had never seen a fight with such high stakes. The galaxy was watching. Humanity was fighting not just for its own survival, but for something much greater. The idea that they could, and would, stand against tyranny. "We'll need a decisive strike," Corin said, his tone sharp. "We've hit them hard, but they're too organized. We need to break their command structure. If we take down their leadership, the rest of the fleet will falter. We'll send a team to infiltrate one of their flagships. If we can disable their command center, the battle will shift in our favor." Valeria's eyes narrowed. The idea was risky, extremely risky, but if they had any chance of winning, it was their only option. The Varktheri relied heavily on centralized control, and if they could disrupt that, it could throw their entire fleet into disarray. "Who will lead the mission?" she asked. "Commander Ryla," Corin replied. "She's the best tactician we have, and I trust her to lead the team into the heart of enemy territory." We'll launch the strike within the hour. Prepare for a fast, decisive operation. Valeria felt the weight of the decision settle over her. If Ryla's team failed, it could mean the end of the resolute peace and the collapse of humanity's position in the war. But failure was not an option. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenge ahead. As the command was relayed, the crew went to work with grim efficiency. The assault team was briefed and geared up for the most dangerous mission of their lives. The plan was simple but perilous. Infiltrate the Varktheri flagship, disable its central command systems, and create chaos within their ranks. The hope was that, in the confusion, the human fleet could exploit the disorder and gain the upper hand. The team's shuttle launched from the resolute peace, cutting through the void toward the flagship of the Varktheri fleet. Inside, Commander Ryla stood at the head of the team, her face a mask of focus. The stakes of this mission were clear. Success meant victory for humanity, but failure meant their destruction. Inside the Varktheri ship, the team would have to move quickly. Every step had to be calculated, every move precise. The Varktheri would be on high alert, and any mistake could cost them everything. As the shuttle approached its target, Valeria watched with a mixture of fear and hope. She knew that this mission was humanity's last chance to turn the tide. If Ryla and her team succeeded, they could change the course of the entire war. If they failed, it could mark the beginning of the end for the human race. The shuttle was within range now. Valeria closed her eyes for a moment, offering a silent prayer. The future of humanity was in their hands. The shuttle carrying Commander Ryla and her team plunged into the heart of the Varktheri flagship, a massive fortress-like vessel that seemed to stretch endlessly in the void. Its metallic surface was jagged, almost alive with the menacing power that it radiated. As they approached, the team inside the shuttle felt the weight of what they were about to do. The mission was simple in theory. Disable the Varktheri's command systems and sow chaos, but its success would require precision and nerves of steel. 5 minutes to drop zone, Ryla said, her voice calm but firm, betraying none of the anxiety that clawed at the back of her mind. The crew around her was focused, each soldier ready for what came next. All systems green, one of her team members reported, securing the weapons and gadgets they'd need for the infiltration. "We're ready, Commander." The shuttle shuddered as it broke through the flagship's outer defenses, a series of intense energy shields designed to keep intruders out. The Varktheri had no intention of allowing any human vessel to get close, but the resolute peace had already launched a series of distractions, pulling the Varktheri's attention away from the shuttle's approach. "We're almost there," Ryla said, eyes narrowing. "Once we land, we move fast. Stay sharp and watch for traps. The Varktheri are not known for being careless." The shuttle's landing gear hit the deck with a soft clang as it touched down inside the flagship's hangar. Ryla and her team leaped out, weapons raised, and immediately began scanning their surroundings. The hangar was dark, eerily silent, except for the hum of the massive ship's engines. "We go in through the main access corridor," Ryla ordered, taking the lead as they moved out. The team followed closely, the sound of their boots echoing in the cavernous, dimly lit corridors. Every step they took was met with the looming sense that danger could strike at any moment. The Varktheri were relentless, and there was no doubt in Ryla's mind that they would be hunting them the moment they were detected. "Commander," one of her officers whispered, pointing ahead. A group of Varktheri soldiers patrolled the hallway. The team froze. The slightest noise could give them away. "Wait for them to pass," Ryla muttered, her eyes scanning the shadows. "We'll take them out quietly." They waited in the darkness, holding their breath. The Varktheri soldiers walked past, unaware of the humans crouching just around the corner. The team moved swiftly, silently, taking down the soldiers with precision strikes before continuing deeper into the heart of the flagship. As they neared the central command room, the tension in the air was palpable. Ryla could feel her heart pounding, each footstep a drumbeat in the quiet. They had to disable the Varktheri's central systems quickly, disrupt the leadership structure, and create chaos within their fleet. The longer they waited, the more vulnerable they became. "We're almost there," Ryla said, her voice steady. "Prepare for a breach." With a signal from Ryla, the team stormed the command room. The Varktheri inside barely had time to react before the humans overwhelmed them. Explosions rang out as charges were placed on the central control systems, disabling the command center with a series of devastating blasts. "Systems down," one of Ryla's officers reported. "The Varktheri fleet is cut off from their command." A cheer rippled through the team, but Ryla remained focused. This was only the first part of the mission. The next step was to get out of the flagship before the Varktheri retaliated. The countdown had already begun, and there was no time to waste. "We move now," Ryla ordered, gesturing toward the exit. "Get to the shuttle. Now." As they ran, the ship's alarms began blaring. The Varktheri knew they'd been sabotaged, and the flagship's defenses began to activate. The countdown to self-destruction was already ticking, a last-ditch effort by the Varktheri to ensure that their enemies didn't leave alive. The team reached the hangar with seconds to spare. The shuttle engines roared to life as they launched away from the doomed flagship. They watched as the Varktheri flagship erupted in a fiery explosion, a massive ball of fire that lit up the dark expanse of space. Back aboard the Resolute Peace, Vulderia Dorn and Admiral Corrin watched from the command center as the Varktheri fleet suddenly fell into disarray. With their command structure crippled, the remaining ships faltered, unable to coordinate their attacks. The human fleet capitalized on the chaos, pushing forward and forcing the Varktheri into retreat. The battle was far from over, but the turning point had arrived. Humanity had made its stand, and today they had won a victory against the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known.